Now, where did I put it? Here it is. Welcome to the Toolbox, where my guests and I discuss the tools they use every day to manage life, trauma, and everything in between. It may not be applicable right now, but it's another tool for your toolbox. And I hope you enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome back to Tools for the Toolbox. I am Chance Burles, as you know, and I have another outstanding guest to bring to you today. So let's kick it off with the same question I always use. Who are you, and what is your military background?
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Chance. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be on your show and on your little shindig here. And I'm Taylor MCcubbin. I'm the CEO of Chimera XR, and we help law enforcement and the military train with virtual reality. My background is with the infantry and the intelligence branches of the military. I spent more time, but all of my time was reserve, mix of full-time, part-time, and yeah, a couple domestic deployments, a few noteworthy little bits of training here and there, writing some programs, weapons programs and stuff like that. And yeah, it kind of drove me to be passionate about training and how we can improve people with simulation.
Wicked. So tell me a little bit about Chimera as a whole. Like, what is it as the CEO? What do you actually do in that?
So the fundamental thing I tried to do when I started the company was bring training more frequently and more easily accessible to any armed professional in Canada. So started off with Chimera firearms training, which still exists, and focused heavily on firearms training, scenario training, a little bit of med, a little bit of combatives, and made some great friends and some other instructors in the industry that helped on those points, and went around delivering training. So that's kind of the first company. And we built out a small team of instructors and military guys. And then the second company that came from the first one is Chimera XR, which is what I focus on now. And that's building a product, building a virtual reality system and selling it to agencies for the purposes of training. So we've been doing that for 14 months, 15 months now. And so day to day, I do mostly sales or product development. Those are kind of the two things I spend most of my time doing. I travel around the US a lot and Canada doing demonstrations and explaining how the system works, or training agencies that have our system how to use it better, or I help work on the product. So basically, taking all of the experience I had from the military and from training and trying to figure out where those kind of Jenga pieces fit or don't fit within the overall structure of the product.
Right on. What are you said you work reserve mostly too, but like how long have you been out, or are you still in the reserves?
I just got my 2 weeks ago, and all my paperwork went through, processed. So yeah, I just got out. 15 years, would have been 16 this month. And yeah, I did a couple like full-time years in Trenton in the reserves as a Class B like instructor, and a few other contract gigs. I was in Meaford too for a little while, and Pat and all the usual suspects, usual places.
Yeah. Meaford was lots of fun. I love being able to pass on the knowledge. I guess that's really like the key, right? Is being able to just lessons learned. This is the way it should be done, right? And it's just great to be able to see people. I called them aha moments, right? When you can see someone grasp a concept, not just what you're teaching them, but the over, and they're like, oh, and I'd be like, there you go. That's what I wanted right there. So how was your transition? If you just got out, how did that, especially reserve unit? Because I talked to a lot of Rike Force people, and the transition's kind of iffy, but you're doing a lot of here and there, like in and out. So what was that transition like?
Yeah, I would suspect it's easier than some folks I know who've done Rike Force but there's some similarities, I think. So, we all, I think, internalize the culture and the identity of being a soldier to some degree. Some more than others, some are more kind of hardcore about it than others, are more whatever. But for me, the hardest thing so far has just been kind of like realizing that I'm not going to get to do certain things that I was hoping to get to do. Okay with that. Like, I'd always wanted to go overseas. I, promised my family I'd finish university before I tried to get to Afghanistan, and I missed that boat by like months. Yeah, you can apply. You're done university and you're ready to go. Then let's put your name in. And later, it all got basically turned down, right, to just supply techs and cooks and kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
And then so that's one part of it, is like, kind of, did I miss out on anything? Did I really do everything I wanted to do? Probably not, but I'm pretty happy with what I did get done, and did some shit that I never thought I would. Like, I was that super unfit kid going into the military. Like, couldn't run a kilometer to save my life.
Yep.
I remember being in line for the push-up bar in basic, and like talking about bodybuilding and getting all muscled up. And I was like, yeah, I want to be like you guys. You guys look like you're so big and like strong. And he's like, they remember them turning to me going, you'll never be this size. You'll never be this strong. Like, all of these things. And I thought to myself, like, ah, shit, 16 years old. I'm like, ah, shit. Like, is that true? Is that really true? And I believed that for years. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but to answer your thing, I got the fittest I'd ever been. I tried out for some special forces units, learned some really interesting things about myself and about the world. So I'm pretty happy with what I did. I think I'll just miss like some of the experiences, obviously some of the people. Like, you don't get those relationships in the civilian world to some extent, right? And like,
yeah,
I'm sure you more, like, obviously overseas, it's that much more, I think, obvious, or that much more like potent, those relationships.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll miss that, and I'll just miss, some of the stuff you get to do. You can't compare with certain things. I mean, being at peace with it, like, being able to just kind of like sit there and not be in an office for a while is great, but at the same time, I don't have to be eaten by mosquitoes and be voluntold to do shit. And so there's pluses and minuses.
For sure. Anytime I get a little too reminiscent, I should say, I'll call one of my buddies that's still in. I'll be like, so what are you guys up to right now? And they're like, I'm in fucking Wainwright or something. And you're just like, thanks. That's all I needed. And I'm good. Cause yeah, there were some really sucky days. But there was some cool stuff too, for sure. I mean, you said it very well, is that the experiences and the people and the time that you get, the stuff you get to do is so far beyond the average citizen's lifestyle. And I think we forget about it sometimes, because I very flippantly say, I was walking around the desert with a metal detector looking for bombs. As if that's normal for everyone else to just be like, oh yeah, okay, that was Thursday, right? And you're like, yeah, I think it was. But that's kind of experience that no one has. There's very, very few people that have been there and done that. And it's a very interesting highlight within your life. Now, you said maybe like 15 months or so, maybe a year that you've been out now, is what you said. Did I catch that right?
I mean, technically, since I was doing stuff a lot, I kind of like transitioned out in the past, I guess, 8 or 9 months. Like, I stopped going to parade and started doing all the paperwork. It took a lot longer than they wanted me to get the paperwork done. But technically, I left 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, well, let's just say if you could go back 2 weeks or 8, 9 months or whatever, when you kind of first started the process, if you could go back there and talk to yourself, give yourself one piece of advice to make it a little bit easier or cleaner, smoother, what would you tell yourself?
Dude, like, it's funny because I kind of thought, this is the part where you can literally just kind of sit back and let them tell you what to do, and it all plays. Just get what you need and off you go, right? Just because in the reserves, like, I thought to myself, we're in the reserves, and therefore, there's got to be like less shit to do, or like it's just got to be a little bit easier to strike force, right? And in some ways, I know in other ways it's not. There's a lot less content, a lot of problems, but I thought to myself, like, how hard could it be, right? Like, it's going to be a pretty simple process. The hardest thing, the biggest thing I was worried about was how much shit I was missing that I had to return. I'm like, fuck, I don't know where that is. And then come to find out, like you need to not only know what the checklist is, but also know like what problems can arise. Because like apparently a whole bunch of my like contract dates didn't line up with my pay dates, and some kind of thin problem that has nothing to do with me is now holding up my pension release and like all the other crap that's supposed to happen. And I didn't even know that was a possibility. So here I am planning for life, going like, okay, once I finish my paperwork, a couple weeks later, this, and it hasn't been like that at all. So I would go back and just like, it'll suck, but just spend a day and do all the paperwork in one day instead of doing little bits here and there. And B, like, ask what could possibly go wrong and how to avoid it. Something else is like mess dues. Like, I didn't even think about this, but they had messed up the mess dues. Like, they had not known when I was getting out of the military effectively, and so they continued charging me mess dues. And then not even my BOR knew about it. Like, the OR was like, go down and clear you out of the mess, and we walked down there, and get your credit card because you pay that. And then she's like charging me $400 for mess dues, and I'm like, yeah, I know I'm a couple months behind on mess dues, but why is it $400? Of course, you go look at it and they're overcharging me, whatever. So there's stuff that I think I even naively somehow 15 years in assumed the system was smarter than it was, or like oh, they'll catch the overcharges, they'll catch out of my fuck ups now, right? Like whatever I put out, not the case.
No, it's the battle of shoulds, right? Like when we get out, it's always, oh, this should be taken care of. This should be sorted out. I don't know why wouldn't it? We have people we have staff to do this exact job. And
I did my job, right? Like you did your what's going on?
My contract was ending. So I did a 5-year and then I did a 3-year.
Mm-hmm.
And I had 2 months left in that extended 3-year. And I had to go to my adj and be like, hey sir, what am I supposed to be doing anything? Like my contract's ending. Should I just do I just walk by the clothing stores and throw the shit in the door? Like, do I just leave? Like, I don't understand what's going on. And he was like, oh shit. And, he made me come back the next day, and I showed up and they passed me a 17-year contract. And I was like, no man, like I was leaving. I'm not staying in. But yeah, it's funny how quickly, you remember that what should happen doesn't always. And usually when we think of things that should happen, those are usually things that fall apart the first, right away.
That should be absurd. The things we expect to happen that should happen are usually the things that will fall apart. Yeah.
It just seems the way. I mean, you go on a patrol and you're like, this should be pretty simple and easy. And then there's a fucking Black Hawk down in the middle of Mogadishu, right? And you're like, what the fuck? It just becomes the biggest fuck ups are usually the things that should have been taken care of. But well, let's talk about training, because I love talking about training. And the one thing that I got to see, and I found this, I'll tell you a little story about how this happened to me, but I got to see a bit of an evolution in the training within the Canadian Forces while I was there. So when I was doing my workup for overseas, we were in Wainwright and we were, sweeping the ground, doing the whole patrolling. We're going to go here and got to go talk to this villager and blah, 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 right? And whenever they wanted to test our skills, they did it in the cheapest way possible. So we need you to clear this road. And we're like, okay. And they're like, so there are mines on the road. We're like, okay. Are they those 4 pieces of wood with nails in them? And they were like, well, yes, but pretend that they're not there and sweep anyway. We're like, okay, sure. So you'd sweep up to it, and you get a hit around the nail, and you're like, okay, cool. And you do your drills, and you start prodding and do all this stuff. And it was garbage, garbage. They couldn't even take the time to dig the fucking things in.
Oh man,
it was just bad. Anyway, there's a whole side story of that, but up to the point where I was teaching in Meaford, and I was handed basically an ETHAR package to teach the recruits, right? And it was a 2-day package, and it was all counter IED. Every part of it. It was all Afghanistan, 5s and 20s, doing your 5Cs, all that stuff. And I was staring at it, I'm like, this isn't ETHAR. This is counter IED. This isn't, a bunch of recruits don't need to know this right now. This isn't part of the training aspect. And so I went to my boss and I was like, hey man, this isn't this isn't accurate and it needs to be updated. And he was like, okay, we'll update it. And I said, oh, okay, cool. And I'm, a young mass corporal. I'm like, haha, I can do whatever I want. And I redrafted. I had done an ether package in 1CR a couple of times, the full package, like the 5-day full package, right? And so I just took that and I slimmed it down into 2 days, and there was some prodding, and there was a bit of counter ID, there was a bit of mind awareness, there's a little bit of UXOs or stuff like that. And I passed it back to my boss, and he was like, yeah, this looks good, give it to training. I gave it to training approved it, they sent it up to PET approved it, they said, fuck, this is awesome, and it became the standard ether package for training in the East.
Of course it did.
For recruits. And I was like, fucking sweet, like that's awesome. But we went from like just whatever they could scrounge, right, to being able to actually take the lessons learned from somebody and go, oh yeah, this actually fucking works, man. Let's do this. So tell me a little bit about what you've seen in terms of training evolution since you got started in the whole firearms world.
Man,
that's a big question, I know.
The thing that I am the happiest about is that I think people are starting to understand their options better, because the people that are instructors are younger, and so they have a little bit better understanding of technology and also like what's effective. I think there was kind of a blunt approach, like a blunt force approach to training before, where it's like, let's do a whole bunch of stuff and let's not really care about any individual piece of it, but we get all of it done, and like, let's go drink beer. And I think like that, not good enough, as you said. And I think there's certain people that also just took the easy way out of things because, at some point they lost the will to really be an instructor, but they're still in that position and they're riding their term out. They're just like, yeah, I'm just going to do my government job and I'm a government worker. And you know what I mean? It's not being a soldier, because I think it would be another interesting conversation to understand. I'd love to know what your guys' thoughts are on, you and your buddies when you're talking to them on what you mentioned before that, what a soldier actually means or what that is. And like, I feel like some of these people, if they had really kept true to that kind of iconic idea of what soldiering is about, they would never have fallen in this direction of literally like, if you weren't wearing a uniform, I would think you were like Sally government worker sitting in whatever. Mm-hmm. To the point where and the person who is in charge of training for the firearms section, all Army guys, right? All infantry guys, except one artillery dude for some reason. And I get parachuted in. There's a couple reserve guys on Class B, but most are Reg Force. The guy who leads it's Reg Force, and very experienced dudes, right? We're talking like they're coming up to 30 years. They've Germany and whatever, like all kinds of, and that's cool. But at some point, this guy had decided 16 years ago, apparently, he had decided that training with holsters is too dangerous for air crew and for anybody on the base to come through the RTF, the training flight, the section that does all the training, and use holsters. So all the Browning high power training, all the pistol training was done this way, okay? You would shoot on the range, you would unload the firearm, and you would place it on a placard. You'd place it on a piece of plywood on the deck of the range, and you'd step back, okay? Apparently it was that way for the entire guy was there before I showed up. And as a younger, sergeant in the infantry and a reservist and not having ever full-time taught firearms, and that's not really a thing you probably remember, right? Like that's not, you either a discipline for a little bit because you're part of a cadre and then you move on, or you teach everything, you just rotate, right? So I'm teaching only pistol and rifle for like every day for as long as I want to. This is weird, but cool. So I just sat there and listened and learned the ways they said to do it. And then about 6 months in, I'm like, I think this is totally messed up. They're still going to use holsters as soon as, and they go get on their aircraft because they have holstered pistols the entire time they fly. So microcosm of, I think, what happens in the military where somebody says this is good enough, and the next person above them doesn't care enough to check that person and go, no, you know what? Like you're just doing the easiest thing. You're not really taking the time and slogging it out to go, Yes, it would be harder to have them use holsters because you have to be more vigilant, you have to have more time in the training, whatever else the problems were, but it's entirely necessary, right?
Yep. Yep. That's it's painful to watch a system kind of implode on itself, right? And when you have instructors who aren't really pushing the boundaries of being in, like, who want to learn, that I think that's the key. Wanting to learn, right?
Mm-hmm.
As an instructor, you want to be better. You don't want to be the guy standing in front of the class the whole time just going like, this is how it is and everything will follow this line. Yeah, it always drove me nuts with the issued holster and the fact that there's the mag pouches on the holster. And so if you need to reload, you have to either reach across your body or switch hands to grab a new mag. And it was just like, that.
Yeah, that thing aside for one of the worst pieces of kit. It's got to be, right? Like, there's a few really, really abysmal pieces of equipment, and that is
so bad.
Like, oh man, it's
yeah. But yeah, it's interesting. You were talking about the we called them relish office workers. Those are the people that just, they put the uniform on, sure, but they're there to just work a 9-to-5 job, and that's as far as they want. They want to check boxes, right? I've done this, I've done that, I've done that. Okay, cool, I can go home. Rather than really wanting to perfect the craft. And what, you mentioned the conversation that I was talking about earlier. We were talking about it in terms of like, what is a soldier before a war? What is their actual job? Right? What should they be doing? And the answer that all of us came to was training for the job. Because as we all know, shit can happen, right? This is the reality of the world, is that the world is chaos. And if I had this conversation with Dave Grossman about the illusion of safety, in that the only reason we're all safe is because we all agree to be safe around one another, right? And if one person decides, I'm not doing this anymore, it becomes dangerous very quickly. And a lot of bad stuff can happen. I had this whole conversation. I've said this, I don't know how many times, had this conversation with my mother one day. She's pretty anti-gun, and I'm very pro-gun. But we had this little conversation. She's like, well, what is the benefit? What's the purpose? I'm perfectly safe here. And I'm like, are you perfectly safe here? Like, nothing bad can happen to you in your own house? And she's like, well, I mean, maybe. And I'm like, wouldn't you want the tool to, like, let's just say a 300-pound dude on fucking PCP decides to kick in your door. What are you going to do? What, you going to call the cops? Okay. Let's say you call the cops. Let's say you actually get 911 in before that guy goes off. Let's say they have a unit in the area. You're looking at maybe 2 minutes. And a lot of shit can happen in 2 minutes. Versus, oh shit, bang, right? And then call the cops. But this is the reality, right? This is, unfortunately, the world we live in, is that dangerous shit can happen at any point in time.
Yeah.
So how do we, from your point of view, how do we bring reality home? How do we show people the reality situation without, like, running around screaming at the top of our lungs, the world is dangerous, the sky is falling, right? How do we do that?
That's a phenomenal question. I think it's a very difficult one to answer, because people are unlikely to want to step outside of their comfort zone, which would be kind of the first step to really understanding, like you said, how much can happen in 2 minutes. So few people get punched in the face these days that they don't believe there are consequences they do, whether that's, just literally having no common sense and doing something that will obviously be bad for you, or intentionally, road rage or whatever else. And again, not recognizing that there could be a consequence to that, not recognizing that the other person in that interaction may value their life less than you do, right? You assume everybody values their life as much as you, then, it's you're going to have a particular kind of expected outcome to each interaction that may or may not be.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, I guess in an ideal world, I think everybody serves. Everybody takes a kind of service on. I really like certain countries in Europe that say that that's a mandatory thing. If it's military, that's fine. Public service, that's fine. I think service is one way to kind of start that process of like thinking about something beyond your little world. But
Mm-hmm.
but that's not really far enough for a lot of people, unfortunately, to really understand um, what can happen and have some kind of check on your ego. So it's tough, but ideally everybody engages in some kind of martial something. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be the hardest freaking MMA thing in the world, but everyone should engage in some kind of combatives program, martial arts program, even just like a really intense physical fitness program. I think those things can really open someone's eyes up to what they're physically capable of and what they're mentally capable of if they think about it. And if they start doing things like trying to process information after doing those things or during those things, and that'll at least give them some idea of it. And in an even better sense of it would be, yeah, literally, we'll put somebody in a red suit, one of those big padded suits, and all they're going to try to do is grab you, hold you down, and that's it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be super complicated or super violent, but it's much more tiring than people think it is to fight, and it's much less predictable than probably people think it is.
Yeah. I totally agree. And I have two little points on that. First off, one of the things that really first attracted me to my wife was we were dating, and I opened the trunk of her car at one point. I don't remember why, but I opened the trunk of her car, I looked in, and there was a hatchet. And it had a sheath on and stuff, and I was like, why do you have a hatchet in the back here? Like, she's not an outdoorsman kind of girl, right? And I was like, why do you have a hatchet? And she just said, just in case. And I was like, yeah, that's a good answer. I like it. Yeah. And I still to this day, I tell that story, I don't know how many times, but I just absolutely love it. And then over time, I started to realize, it's like, it just makes her feel safe, though. She doesn't train with it. She doesn't, like, she's never sat and tried to be under stress and tried to get her keys in the trunk and try to get the thing out and then get the sheath off and then like, aha, and then actually fight with it. Because like, where are you going to get the opportunity to do that, right? But it makes her feel safe just having it there. But I also know that if you don't train with it, it's rarely going to work out in your favor, right? We all know that you, what is the old saying? You fall to the level of your training, not rise to the level of your
rise to the occasion.
Yeah. And that, so there's that point of it, right? You can make yourself feel safe with anything, but the reality is that you have to train. You have to train, constantly train. And the fifth suit, you got me thinking that I have this little memory. I got to be I was on Pat Platoon in Gagetown, and I was just waiting for a course. And they put on a crowd control operation course for senior NCOs. And I got to be part of the crowd. And so, like, they told us, like, riot, like, give her. These guys are sergeants and above. If you got any rage against the higher echelon, now's the time. Give her. So we had like 40, 50 people against, I think it was like 20 odd, guys in riot gear. And they put 3 of us in fifth suits, in the full fifth suits. And they're like, get it on. And we were like, okay. And we went to town, but it was amazing how quickly we got scattered. And I mean, we're all fucking piss and vinegar, and we're gonna go crazy, right? But highly skilled, well trained, very disciplined troops. The people with fifth suits got taken out like that. If you got a baton, you got shot, right? At one point, I remember being able to grab one of the guy's batons, and I was like, I got one, and I see this rifle barrel go and point at me, and I'm like, ah, crap. And it just, like, in between the shields, it wasn't even like outwards. I just saw the rifle barrel come up. I'm like, fuck, and I laid down because I was dead. But the reality of the situation is that your training is the key, right? So how do you train people for reality when you're doing your firearms training, when you're doing the virtual stuff? Either way, how do you train them for reality?
So there's a couple elements that have to be there. First, if we're using any kind of simulation, the simulation has to allow the student, to employ everything they've learned in the real world in that world, as much as possible, as much of the time. There has to be very little of those exercisisms, rangeisms, where you just kind of like, yeah, like you said, I wouldn't normally pass my pistol from one hand to the other to grab a magazine, but in this case, like as little as possible, and theoretically, and I think practically, anything that falls in that category of breaking that reality could also create negative training, could create a scar potentially, or even just a deteriorating factor on how much they're going to really take away from the training, and be able to apply it under stress.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of it is the realism of the training itself, burying the mine so it actually looks and sounds and feels like a mine instead of like, oh, it's a bunch of wood and some nails. So making as realistic as possible is always a struggle, but it's going that extra mile that I think makes a difference. So like in Trenton, I was frustrated by the fact the Screen Simulator was a flat one screen system. It had 3 screens, but because of the way it was built, you could only use one for videos. So when I was running scenario training for military police or for the airfield security team, they walk in the room, because I'd have them start outside the room, right? I wouldn't just start on the line like you're in a duel. I was like, no, you're going to walk into this situation and start assessing what it is as you're walking in. And I thought, oh, that's a good realism point. And then as soon as they started doing this a few times, I realized, yeah, but they know immediately where the threat's going to be. They don't look anywhere else. So we're reinforcing bad habits because of the way this is built. So the tools didn't really match what the job needed to be because I was putting it in the wrong context. So another thing would be like understanding the context of what you're trying to do. So for example, if your goal is to improve your accuracy with a handgun at 5 meters, then your ability to turn your head and process information behind you is absolutely not helpful to your ability to put a round on that target. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It may be useful for you to do the search, assess, scan, whatever, like all that stuff might be useful because you're remembering to keep it in your mind while you're doing shooting stuff, but like it really has no effect to put on a target. And so people kind of get confused, and that it's almost like going to the gym and doing a whole bunch of stuff and expecting to have a great effect, but you didn't really plan it and you didn't really execute based on specific goals. You know what I mean? So isolating specific goals based on context of what the tools you're using really are meant for. So anytime I run training, I try to keep that in mind and say, well, the goal of this training here is to improve your ability to, understand the right decision to make. And so in this sense, while marksmanship is important, I'm not going to stop the scenario midway because you're terrible at marksmanship, right? The point of this is to work through decision making, and if you make a mistake, keep going and figure out how to get past that, and then figure out how to communicate and all the rest of the pieces that have to do with you thinking through the problem, not me picking, your gear is messed up and we got to stop because your gear, like that. That's a reality that can happen that they need to find out. Just like we do in the military when you're like, oh, I thought this was going to work, and 15 minutes into this is a terrible idea. Why 2 pairs of socks? I thought this was great. Everyone said. So yeah, I think if I had to break it out, I would say the realism, right? We want as much as we can. Tony Flower always says the realist fake stuff we can do, right? The realist fake come up with. We want the tools, the right tools ideally, and even if they're the wrong tools, or they're not the best tools, at least use them in the right context. Like a simulator for anyone who's still in the military. That thing is useful. I know it probably breaks more than you'd like. It sucks when it does, and it's not always a fun thing to use, but it's really good for marksmanship. You can get a lot done on marksmanship on that thing. But when you start to do scenario training, you basically get like 15 minutes of value out of it, and then you're just starting to diminish. You're getting those diminishing returns because you're reinforcing tunnel. You've already done all the decision-making part you're going to do, so now you're just playing a video game, kind of, rather than, like you said, put somebody in a suit, give them a script, and have to react based on a real human being with 3D things and problems and like distance and time and all those factors that are really important.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I remember watching, I think it was a documentary on the SEALs, or maybe it was just on their training method, but they were talking about how they their scenario training. Well, they have a hood on, and they're just in a room, and then the hood comes up, and they have to figure out maybe they're not even looking in the right direction, right? And they have to like figure out what's happening, and then engage. Figure out how to engage, right? Do they just talk to somebody giving directions, or do they need to like immediately draw and fire? Do they need to knife fight? Like the ability to create, what's the word for it? A sense of a lack of understanding the situation, right? Of having to figure it out in that instant, rather than just go to the gun, or just go to you can just go down the street 3 doors down that way, right? You have to go, oh shit, what's going on? Oh, okay. And then make those, process those OODA loops over and over and over and over and over and over again. It's it's crazy. The sim, what is the program called? I can't remember, where they have like, you were just talking about with the one screen, and there's like a video of shit going on. You're right. There's the benefit of that is very finite, right? You're training one scenario based. I always had trouble with that too, because anytime you make a decision, like, what was the one? We were supposed to be standing at a bridge, right? And then a vehicle's coming at us. What do? Well, we're army people, so I just started shooting. If this guy's roaring at me, it's up and we're gone. And I put, I don't know, half a dozen, maybe 7, 8, 9 rounds into it, and the video just keeps coming, right? You just see the little tick, 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 and the video comes, and there's the brake, and then the truck goes off the road, and there's a suspension of reality there that you have to go, oh, okay, that kind of worked. So I get what I really wanted to talk about with the VR systems is, what are the benefits that we have virtually, instead of trying to create either physical scenarios or using blanks or whatever. What's the benefit to the virtual side of it?
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot further down that road of realism, and I'm not going to pretend that we get all the way there in some respects, because there's always going to be some threshold, at least in the next, I say, like 10 to 15 years of like, this is a simulation because, right? I mean, when we get to that point where you really can't tell it's a simulation, I mean, that starts to get scary, right? Like some people back to reality. So what we see now is virtual reality has a couple massive advantages. Number one, it is a one world environment, like one complete immersive environment. So instead of saying, yeah, I see the screen, I'm watching that video, but I'm also thinking about the instructor behind me giving me instruction or grading me, and I'm also looking left and right at dudes who are in the scenario or maybe just waiting for their turn, and they're not part of this, but they're here because we're on the same building and it's raining outside, so they're not going to wait outside. Like, okay, so I have to look at them and there's the screen. Instead of having to deal with these kind of multiple things and really know in your heart, like, this is not really happening. VR is able to trick the mind in such a way that we've never been able to see, to the point where I've had the most badass of people literally go to lean on cars that aren't there in reality and fall over, right? If I can trick you so conclusively that you go to lean on something that isn't there in your own house, in your own training facility, in a big open space, right? I think that's a huge step forward in terms of believability and realism. And then the other major piece of it, we have never been able to before control and identify what our students see, right? Exactly what they see, not part of what they see because they see the screen or they see the actor and that's where we told them to go find the thing, or there's the mine over here. But I can control everything that they see, and I can see what they're looking at and how they're looking at it. So how many times have you probably explained what a sight picture looks like and done this and drawn it on a board, and then someone still didn't get it somehow, right? There's still some kind of broken telephone there where they're like, oh, I thought you put the dot on top of the other third dot, like something else.
Yeah.
We can see what they see in VR, and that gives us things like, a good assessment of their technical ability with a firearm. It gives us things like, what are they paying attention to? Where are they looking? And then, of course, like the training part of it, right? Instead of saying, it's a theoretical class that is a PowerPoint and you just kind of sit there death by PowerPoint, the interactivity of it, you can see how engaged they are. You can see if they're doing things properly. And you could even have the system guide the person through the learning process without needing the instructor to go step by step with them, which means, we can start really focusing on the more challenging things that are, hard to get across in any environment, in terms of information, passive information and teaching, to get those aha moments, to get those special kind of like, oh, okay, like that's VR is good for getting them part of the way there, and then we finish them off. So there's a number of advantages, mobility, cost savings. There's all kinds of stuff to it, but the stuff that I really fell in love with when I first started prototyping in 2017, 2018 was like, and I was literally in the basement of a PMQ with some buddies. This is freaking crazy. Was like, okay, not only am I totally forgetting I'm in the basement of this guy's house, but also like the way they had set up this video game, we were playing like the John Wick Chronicles or something in this VR thing, was like, it's kind of like those arcade games where it walked you through sort of where it wanted you to go. And I was just sitting there thinking like, what if we could walk troops through, how to do a deliberate offensive, CQB, whatever it is. And then, they walk into the actual shoot house and we know that they're going to be safe enough because they've done it a number of times, not just on a video game thing with a, we've probably seen this too. There's a couple different VBS and other things in the military that, keyboard and mouse, right? Which is, okay, there's a little bit of exercising, but I want those physical skills that are really going to be dangerous because, as you said, it doesn't come down to how many times I say, be really safe there, troops. Like, matter. It comes down to presently in their head, they're going, yeah, I need to operate the safety every time I move the carbine up to my eye down. Not point my firearm at somebody else at any point for any reason. So that's a quick one on VR. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's it's fantastic. I remember when we were doing workup, there was we had a soldier get shot in the back with C9. And I think he took three or four rounds, and he had his training plates in, but that they only helped so much, right? He survived and was taken to the hospital, unfortunately. It was a horrible situation, but we were doing live pairs.
Was that a dude?
Say again?
Was that a Kansoff dude or Reg?
Nope. Reg Force Infantry. Yeah. I think he was. I can't remember where he's from. Anyway, he. From what we heard, like, again, I wasn't there, but from what we heard while we were on training was because we heard the no duff, right? And all of a sudden shit starts going down. But as he made his bound forward, he stepped in front of the 9-gunner, and the 9-gunner was just throwing a burst up and was about to move, but he didn't switch his arcs. The safety guy didn't catch it. Like, it was a bad situation throughout. And that's, when you're doing a live pairs, you have an instructor directly behind you with a friggin' stick watching your arcs, and if that dude moves in, you get told shift left, and you right. There's no. It's very easy to make a mistake there, right? Even with the layers of redundancy, and those mistakes are final.
Yeah,
it's just bad situation all around. That's why we train so hard with blanks. That's why we train so hard with dry fire. That's why we do our TOETs all the time. That's why you go over and over and over and over them. To the point, like I was a C9 gunner too myself. And I remember I had a young recruit. I was teaching the C9 in Meaford, and a young recruit was like, Mouse Corporal, I think I got this pretty well. You want to have a race? And I was like, are you sure? Are you sure? I've been working this for little, better part of 6 years. And he's like, oh no, I think I got you. And I was like, okay, what do I get if I win? And he was like, I'll do, I think it was like 100 push-ups or something like that. And I was like, okay, you're not getting off the ground until you're doing 100 push-ups, right? And he's like, I was like, this is the deal, man. So, yeah. And the first thing they were like, okay, load. And I was like, bang. And there was like, oh, and he knew he made a mistake. As soon as I got that box on it, he was like, dang, ready. And I was on, and it's like, dude, like training, time. You think you got it now? You've only been doing it for 2 weeks, right? You talking about years worth of training versus 2 weeks. Anyway, he eventually did a ton of push-ups in front of me, and I think I got bored at like 60 or 70, and I was like, you know what, man, just like, I'm tired, let's go. But that's the key, is the drills over and over and over again. And you were talking about manipulating the safety, talking about your draw, your sight picture. And yes, as much as I can explain something to you, like I could tell you what it's like to prod, and I could explain to you how the process is, that I can go step by step by step, and we can sit in a room and PowerPoint to death. But until you're on the ground with your face in the dirt for 20, 30 minutes of just prodding over and over again, you never really know the strain. And I think that's the key that at least the virtual side of it gives you, because I know there's a lot of work in terms of virtual environments for dealing with PTSD. And because I'm trying to remember now, but I had a psychologist tell me that they were doing work with, like, putting people in the same room with the sounds, the smells, and like the structures, but it was still a built environment. So, you could be safe, but you'd be in those environments. And then they would play the sounds of it, like gunfire and all that stuff in the speaker systems, which is great. But again, you still know, right? Like, you're not there. Now, the benefit of the virtual side of it is, like you said, man, you get to choose. You can very specifically work on it, and you can very specifically run through mistakes, which is what I love, is that's the way you learn, right? You have to make mistakes and then go, oh shit, and then do it over again, do it over again, and do it over again. Do you have, do you see a really large increase in the learning factor to using VR versus doing dry fires over and over again, or is it more even?
So right now, I think the main thing we've seen and what we focused on up to this point was practicing tactics and drills that would be very difficult to do on a consistent basis. So things like CQB or vehicle tactics, things that most, especially law enforcement, as well as some military, so like, let's say the medics, right? So we did a contract for the medics, and it allowed them to have their members actually exercise being in a force-on-force environment, and using their C7, and working around cover and doing things that, like, they would just never get to do unless they were doing, a typical kind of Wainwright once a year exercise, where maybe if somebody thought about it, they would really challenge them to do something that they would, hopefully never have to do, but challenge them to do those skills. So that's what we focused up on to this point. And what we've seen is the people that are using our system are getting reps on high-risk environments, high-risk scenarios, and events that they wouldn't otherwise be able to train frequently. So that's kind of the immediate thing we've seen. We've also seen some learning happen around, what their decision-making process is and how that needs to change. And I think finally the safety element of it and what flagging looks like in a dynamic environment, and like how different that can be when all you've done is target stuff and you haven't really, done force on force or tested that theory in a more challenging kind of dynamic scenario. Again, scenario training is hard to do well. Most people in places will put an actor, maybe two actors, right, for one person or a team of people to interact with, but very little, how many times are we really dealing with one or two people at a time, right? So it's, it is, I think, for a lot of people to represent that kind of interaction. So VR does that really well. We focused on that a lot. I think the next stage, and what we're currently working on, is curriculum. We've started building out full curriculum that has checks and that has, guiding principles and points to hit, and then also scoring in various ways. So we've had like scoring targets for a while, different grouping size and time and whatever, but now we're really looking at, okay, so if there's a certain set of skills you need to have to be able to go do a live fire CQB run with a 4-man team or pairs fire movement, what are those skill sets and how will the system check those skill sets so that essentially you've done those dry reps. Let's say you did them, I don't know, at the parade square and in a dry fashion there. You did them so convincingly because of VR that not only did we check the safety and automatically determine the safety or unsafe nature of it, so we got a higher throughput of people, but also that the practice was much closer to the reality. So they had a lot more, understanding of, oh yeah, I'm also going to have to use cover. Because I think we've all seen people get overwhelmed when you ask them to do more than one thing at one time, right? Like they can shoot accurately, but as soon as you ask them to do that in a weird position from around a piece of cover while communicating, it's like something's going to fall off the rails if it's their first time doing that, or maybe even their 10th time. Like you said, the guy's done it for a couple of weeks, but it takes a long time to really get everything to work and sync smoothly from shoot, move, communicate kind of perspective. So I think that's I think that's the reality.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, what about, I remember a while ago so I worked in a video game store for many years, actually before I was in the military, and it was awesome because I got to see the evolution of, when I started working there, we were still on Super Nintendo, and when I left working there, like Xbox 360 was coming out, and I was like, so I got to see this evolution anyway. One of the things they were working on was augmented reality at the time, and this was back when I think PlayStation 2 maybe was coming. It was still coming, like PlayStation 1 was just ending. And they're working on augmented reality in which you would have a physical structure and then you would move and there would be like pop-up targets and stuff like that. And it was still very in its infancy. Do you guys have any view towards that, or are you going to continue on the virtual side of it, or are you going to integrate those two? What's the plan for down the road?
Yeah, so the company, we called it Chimera XR on purpose, right? I don't think virtual reality is the be all end all. Live training is still super important. Dry training is still important. And I think other modalities could really be beneficial. AR has so far been either too expensive if you're doing it really properly, or if you do it inexpensively, it's just not very convincing and it's not very realistic. So the hardware hasn't really caught up with the needs of the user in the military sense or in the law enforcement sense. To give you kind of frame of reference, the only system that really does that in the world right now for like CQB, the kind of thing you're talking about, it's $300,000 for 4 people, right? Yeah,
just a little out of my price range.
Not happen for most agencies in the near term, and probably shouldn't happen even if they did have the money, because it certainly will not be that expensive come a year or two from now. And VR versus AR, right, is an interesting thing to consider. And anybody who's looking at simulation and thinking, how am I going to use it better? Or eventually, how am I going to buy a system that makes sense for my team or my group, my agency? Like, think about what, again, the context is you're trying to achieve, because AR only does one thing, right? VR does one other thing. So AR does, I want my environment with things dropped into it. So you need your environment at all times for that to really make sense, right? Otherwise, you're just dropping people in whatever place, and that might be a totally different context. Like you're in your parade square versus you're in the shoot house. Those are two totally different contexts. Depending on what you're trying to do, may or may not really be useful, because very expensive system just so that you can shoot a person-looking thing in your parade square may only serve a limited purpose, versus I can move through the whole shoot house, right? So do you have access to your shoot house all the time? Do you have to book it? Is that a process? Do you have to do the template? Like, you know what I mean? There's a whole bunch of things that have to happen there. Again, $300,000 system might, kind of, once you get it all done, be useful there. Versus like the cheaper ones, field of view is really small. The objects are transparent. So, that's not a real object and I can see past it. And so you start getting like switching. I see a lot of the time where I'm really switching my focus visually between what I'm seeing in the lens and what's around, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So VR, in contrast, like, while it doesn't use your existing environment, and while you have to build the boundaries that it matches your environment, and there's some like particulars to that, once you've got that space to work in, anything is game, right? Set up environment in any number of situations you want and switch it at, on a dime. And you can also just like change the representation of people. So maybe you know that, well, Jim is always playing the bad guy when we're doing this kind of whatever scenario. Well, you don't want to know it's Jim, right? I mean, AR is not going to help you with that if you want to use light. Versus VR, like, yeah, you can have that person look like whatever you want, right? And even sound like whatever you want in order to really evoke that realism of like, yeah, but are you really going to talk to like an old lady that could be your grandmother like that? You know what I mean? When you're trying to you're dealing with like the civilian side of things, let's say, and you have to have some kind of common sense with it. Like throw everybody to the ground. So I think VR right now the most potential, but we've done a lot of testing with mixed reality, which is kind of the blend between the two. But right now, that's again pretty expensive, and it's also a tethered operation. So you need to have a big ass computer and a cable going from the headset to the computer. So again, kind of limits the context that it could be useful.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. What kind of interconnectivity do you have for the VR systems now? Because I mean, it's great to be working by yourself doing these drills, but these are all team-based environments, right? So how do you blend that?
Yeah, there's a multi-user system.
Sweet.
That can communicate with any other headset, either on internet connection or off of one. We've got a couple different options. So we've done, like, you can create a LAN network, like an off the internet LAN network on a router, and then connect the headsets that way. That's what we're doing with a lot of federal clients that don't have the infrastructure. Like, still, so many bases don't have Wi-Fi places, right? Yeah. And then we also have a peer-to-peer networking solution for international exercises. So we've had 6 people in 3 countries participate in the same exercise, the same scenarios in our system, and that was just peer-to-peer internet. So we're working on the second evolution of that, which is going to be more like a traditional game server that people can, control and lock and all kinds of things people want to host it off of their own local machine, but on a server, on the cloud. So that's what's being worked on right now for, UK military as well as Canadian military clients.
Wicked. That, yeah. I mean, I would love to be able to play with in a VR realm, doing the same training or training with other people from other units all over the world. I think that's fantastic. And I say this regularly, is that we as a generation have access to something that no generation has ever had, and that is a communication network that spans the fucking globe. And we can talk to anybody, and now we can train with anybody. We don't have to fly people to other countries to work with them. I think that is fucking outstanding.
Yeah,
outstanding.
To improve accordingly, right? So you think back to I'm in Afghanistan, and the things you learned there, and the things that we learned collectively as an organization in Afghanistan, how long it took for that to translate into a new C7 PAM, right? And how long that took. I don't know what the equivalent is in the engineer world, because I don't blow stuff up for a living, but I'm like that, where this 5 years ago, and we're only just now starting to really make policies change as a result of it. So I think like lessons learned is a whole other thing. Debriefs, AARs that are real time. I think that's a huge piece. A buddy of mine, Dave Hawkins, also an ex-combat engineer, dug pretty deep into this idea. Like, dude, there are TTPs that I saw overseas that I would love to be able to pass back to the guys who are rotating in, so that, and we'll do a rotation and there'll be some handover, but some handovers are a couple days. Like, there's not that much time. And maybe you just don't even have the resources to do it properly. And so what you just say, no, I'm going to build the scenario that happened. Here's exactly what happened. Here's how it went down. Here's what we noticed. And then here's how we did it differently. And not just a theory, like here's a PowerPoint slide I'm going to email to my buddy in Canada, but this is the 3D scenario that you can play back, and then you can actually put yourself in the hot seat so that you do get the rep. You do, like you said, the repetitions are the thing. That's it. Everyone learns the same way. It's repetition. So you get the repetitions of, okay, how do I react to this new form of whatever it is, tactic, warfare, whatever.
Yeah, that's outstanding. I really, all I want to do after talking with you is get onto the system and just play around with it. But I don't know if I'd ever leave. I'd be out shooting stuff all day long. What kind of if someone wanted to get the system, what do they need to do? Is it, I imagine it's specifically law enforcement or military at the moment. Are you looking at expanding it into the civilian market, or is it just going to stick to federal, municipal kind of things?
Yeah, for sure. So right now, and for the last year and a bit, we focused on professionals and armed professionals from those disciplines, and also the security world and the training world. So certain training companies have our system, so regular folks can access the system through those training companies. Now, there's not a ton of them right now. There's, we have one in California, one in Idaho, us here in Toronto. There's not a ton, but that's going to keep growing. And we are eventually going to launch a consumer version of the product.
Sweet.
But right now, if you are in uniform, or if you know people who are in uniform and they want to try our system out, we offer a free trial, 2 to 5 days, depending on the size of the organization. And we can do rental contracts or obviously a straight up purchase. Like in the military contract I was mentioning before with the medics, we just did a rental. We just showed up for a day, ran training, and even did a little bit of instructing or like consulting, if you will, on, yeah, here's some things to think about when you're doing this kind of operation, and run the system, and then just, take it with us when we go. So, and we're in Drimus, like we've done the procurement stuff. So if people are like, yeah, this sounds like a cool idea, either to be, trained to excite and have some new kind of ways of doing things, or just doing it better, frankly, in some respects, pairs, fire, and movement, again, one of those things like, when you do get the chance to do it, it's great, but maybe you don't get to do it most of the year. And then when you get that 1 or 2 repetitions, like how are you really learning on that 1 or 2 repetitions? How much are you really going to learn versus like, I got a famil. I basically got a famil every time I did that. And then we moved on to the next stage and I had to think about something. So yeah, so I mean, you can go deep on certain topics. We're increasing the amount of breadth to those topics. We're actually creating an explosive section now. I mean, you have grenades and stuff in our system now, but yeah, explosive briefing. We're also working on
fuck yeah.
Yeah, IEDs and all the bad stuff that needs to be readily available information. And like you said, I mean, what if the sharing of information just gets so good that there are no more secrets when we show up somewhere? Like, between the different networks of people that are going to use this, like ideally, we should have very few surprises. You know what I mean? We should have like, well, I mean, this is what they did in Amsterdam and in the Netherlands, and here's how it went down. And okay, so now like we know about that.
Now here's a question. How difficult is it to build like historical scenarios? Because I was just thinking, like, as you were mentioning it, I was thinking about how awesome it would be able to go through like the Iranian embassy siege back in the 80s. How wicked would that be to actually run through that sequence of events and just, again, lessons learned, because all we're getting is the AARs of the guys afterwards, or the German handling of the Israeli 11 that in Munich, right? Or like they're huge, they're big, maybe mistakes or wins and losses kind of things in the whole realm of developing counterterrorism and CQB and combat and all these things. How easy is it to build those kind of scenarios?
It's very easy. I mean, the thing is behaviors and like the different animations, the way they have to play out for it to make sense. So the behaviors of the bad guy, let's say, the way we've built it so far is we've primarily focused on putting the power in the hands of the end user. Again, because it's born out of my own frustrations in the military of seeing this really potentially powerful simulator basically be hamstrung by the fact that we just didn't have enough scenarios and there just wasn't that much stuff, and buying more stuff took like years and maybe would never happen anyway if someone didn't agree. So, you couldn't really build that much in the scenario sense. You could build drill stuff, put targets here and there, but never really be able to build out good scenarios. So we built the editor into the product at the end user level where they could drag and drop any asset that you can imagine: cars, structures, targets, whatever you want, people. And then for the people, we built a submenu that allow you to edit their behavior. So you can say, I want them to default be aggressive. Default, they're going to have camper, kind of run and hide, find a place to shoot from and shoot from that place. And then everything about them, what they look like, how many rounds they take before they give up, how many rounds they take before they die. So psychological versus physiological stops, and even like, is the weapon overt? Is it concealed? So we try to put enough variables there that you can get a lot of good usefulness out of it, especially because we have, I think, 7 different environments now. So you can choose from like East Africa to a neighborhood to a supermarket to whatever. Like you can pick a bunch of different things. You can drag and drop a fob into your environment. Like we've got, and fog, like razor wire and everything you could possibly, all your engineer fantasies come to life. Hard work and all of it.
Yeah. Man, if I could do that in real life and be that someone's like, I need all this HESCO filled, and I go, cool, done. That was like that would make my life so much easier than
Yeah.
standing there with a shovel trying to like, I hate my life. Well, okay, and then the last question I guess I have is like, I mean, user customization is fantastic. That is that's outstanding because you can really, if you can build it the way you want, then you can engage in scenarios that, you know, you can make them as hard as you want. You can you can make it almost impossible to fight your way out of. And then, you know, lose and restart and do it again and lose and restart, do it again until you can make those decisions clearly and cleanly. And even, you know, they had it in Star Trek, actually. I think maybe you should adapt this at some point, but the Kobayashi Maru test, I don't know if you know what that is.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, there you go. So it's the, you know, the impossible question is there's no right answer. You're going to lose. And I think that's a part of training, because when we were doing, you know, clearance, or we were doing UXOs, or we're dealing with IEDs, or trying to demolish stuff, they always do this in training. It's like, you can do everything right, and that thing can still go off in your face, and you're like, yeah, that makes perfect sense, right? And then we do crazy stuff. We do crazy stuff anyway and get away with it. So who knows? So we've been rolling for just over an hour here, brother, and it has been just an outstanding conversation. First off, thank you for joining me, because this has just been awesome. Any final points? Any thing we missed, or you want to get off your chest?
I mean, I love talking to guys like you. I really enjoyed our conversation. There's a real value in people listening to this podcast, having similar conversations with people in their workplace. And you might be surprised, maybe if you engage a coworker in a conversation about what they think could be done better or differently in the training world, and that world that they're in. Maybe you'll learn something, or find out something new. I think we didn't do enough of that. I think we didn't challenge the status quo of things almost ever, frankly. Some of that's policy, I get it. Like, you have lesson plans handed down that you have to teach, and I get that. But also you got to ask yourself, like be analytical. You know what I mean? Like, the only real thing I got out of university is be analytical. Like, don't just take everything at face value and say, yeah, that's great because someone said it's great. I mean, does it work? Did you measure it? Did you find some way to determine beyond a qualitative measurement of like, I felt good about it. Do you feel good about it? We felt good about it. Like, other than qualitative assessment, did you measure the times that this happened in reality and see how many times we effectively did the tactic we're teaching? Is one easy one. So like in the law enforcement world, which we can learn a lot from in the military and vice versa, and specific contexts, there's a lot of things that happen that are unopposed. And so people keep doing that, right? Like, they'll rush up to a car that they suspect has bad guys with guns in it, and they'll rush right up to the car and stick the barrel of the gun like right in the guy's face, never having been opposed doing that. And then as soon as they're opposed doing that, if you look at what the video came out of Chicago, I think yesterday, or at least I saw it yesterday, you'll see what happens when people get opposed. And human behavior is like, no, I don't want to stand here while people are shooting at me. I'm going to run away. I'm going to find somewhere else to be rather than here. And so what if you just plan for that? Because if anything will work against someone who doesn't resist. Anything, combatively will work against someone who's not opposing you. But as soon as you have opposition, like you said, trained opposition in that riot scenario we talked about, things will fall apart. So I would say pressure testing is huge. If you're an instructor, don't be lazy. It's super easy to be lazy, but put yourself through what you're putting the students through every once in a while. Something we didn't do as well is, okay, we train PWT2, I think it was, with the gas mask, right? And we tell the students, put the gas mask on, like, go and shoot. And a lot of people just skip that part, but we were doing it. But the thing is, because we hadn't done it ourselves as instructors in a long time, we also just didn't know what the hell we were talking about on certain points, right? Yeah. And then I'm like, I think I'm going to shoot with the gas mask after we're done with this, because I'm just curious about something. And then I go and figure out that, like, no, I was telling them to move their head left and right when I meant to say up and down, because left and right doesn't really change anything. But if you hadn't done this recently, you wouldn't make that mistake, right? So, do the things that you're telling the people to do, and lead by example is kind of a cliche, but in this case, like, you got to do your own training too. Like, it's super easy to become the instructor and just be comfortable and be like, I'm good. I got the epaulet. I'm set. I've got it made in the shape. And that's the problem, where we all have opportunity, and you don't realize it until you see maybe that student or that candidate like 2 or 3 years later, and you're like, yes, I did the right thing, or nah, that could have been better because this person is not. So you have more as instructors. If you're an instructor listening to this podcast, first of all, good for you for actually listening to a goddamn podcast, but also remember that you have an effect on each person you're dealing with, maybe greater than you even think, right? It could be even like a moral or psychological effect on these students. So, not only don't be lazy, but put yourself in the student's shoes. Make sure you do the hard stuff yourself, do the training yourself. Make sure you can demo anything you're teaching. Again, something you just don't see that often in the military, right? Like demonstrations are huge, and it's a good thing in the military that it is, but a lot of the time I've seen, like, especially in shooting domains, like, it's just not demoed. It's like, yep, you're going to go shoot amount of rounds and get this grouping. And I'm like, sir, I don't think you could get that grouping if you were to shoot that amount of rounds from the kneeling position at 200 meters. You know what I mean? Like, let's actually what we're saying we're going to do. Yeah.
No, I you reminded me of this great, I had this moment with a recruit in Meaford and we were doing 2 ATs because we were going out to the range, and he was shooting left-handed, and then he would switch to right-handed, do his drills, and then go back to left-handed and start shooting again. And I was like, what the fuck are you doing? He was just like, well, this is, I was taught in basic that everything has to be done right-handed. And I was like, does your rifle have ambidextrous appliances? And he was like, yeah. I'm like, then you can do your drills left-handed. He's like, but I've never done them left-handed. I'm like, well, look, I'm right-handed, watch. And I did the drills left-handed. And he was like, okay. And so I sat there and I drilled them through 4 or 5, reps of going left-handed. And I was like, you're going to have to work through this because you've been taught wrong. Not so much wrong, but like you've been taught a way to do things that is not effective for you. And that's the big thing, is understanding, we said it earlier, as when you're an instructor, you should be wanting to learn. That as the key tenet of being an instructor, you should continually want to learn. And if you are continually evolving, then what you are teaching will continue to evolve. And that is really important, at least in my view. Because if you don't, then you get stale, everything gets stagnant. And then we're learning, gunfighter for 20 years. And they're like, that doesn't really work anymore. One of the things, like, I'm 6'6". Most shooting positions for people are not the same for me, right? Because if they're like, we're going to shoot from kneeling and you're going to be over a target. Well, if I'm kneeling, I'm like chest up. I'm still shooting unsupported. If I need to be supported, I got to be like in a half squat kind of weird position. But that's up to me to figure out, and that's up to me to then teach to other people and say, like, yes, this is a baseline, right? Shooting from the kneeling, cool, baseline. Find something that works for you, because otherwise it's not going to work. It's just crazy. Well, thank you again, brother. It has been an outstanding conversation. I can't wait to see your system next time I'm in Toronto. I will see if you're around, and maybe I can get a quick little demo. I really want to play with it now. It sounds awesome. I guess we'll see you in the virtual world.
Yes.
Perhaps.
World. Thanks so much for having me, man.
It's my pleasure, brother. That concludes another episode of The Toolbox. I really appreciate y'all listening. It has been my absolute pleasure bringing you this guest. If you enjoyed what you heard, please like, share, subscribe, do all that other wicked stuff. It helps me keep the lights on. To all those out there putting it on the line every day, I just want to let you know that I appreciate you. Military, veterans, first responders, civil servants, you name it. Keep this place running, and I really do appreciate it. So thank you. Don't forget, stay open, stay humble, stay focused, with grace, not slack. Chimo.